The stairs are gone. It seems they didn't work so well visually, especially all the dead leaves behind me. The next session will be in a place called tomorrow, my next session with you, and so then we will start having questions, perhaps even answers. But for this session, I suggest we put the questions aside. You can pick them up tomorrow in the now. Sometimes questions and answers can be helpful. At other times, questions can be a way in which the mind tries to stay in control and refuses to shut up. And then it comes up with another question. I had a retreat a few years ago when this happened to a man. He's probably here today, or he's totally enlightened and doesn't come anymore. After the retreat, the last session, the entire retreat was, of course, about presence. And I've just one more question. Can you please explain again, perhaps in different words? You just define what presence is. I just don't get it. So the essence of this, the whole retreat, is just, of course, very simple. It's finding that dimension that we could call presence, the inner dimension of spaciousness, we could call awareness, the transcendent dimension. What is it that you transcend? You transcend means go beyond. You transcend the mind-made sense of self, which we could call the ego, so that your sense of who you are, which is very important to people, it's very important, starts with children. They want an identity, they need an identity. So they need to have a sense of who they are. So that is no longer, the sense of identity is no longer derived from the conceptual self in the head, but from a deeper place of being. That is self-transcendence. And the moments of self-transcendence are extremely important that you experience. Nature can be very helpful. When you contemplate nature, give your fullest attention to nature, and this is a great opportunity around here. You give your fullest attention to nature, then you experience temporary self-transcendence, because while you give your fullest attention to nature, so much attention that you're not even thinking about it, you're just fully present with it and observing, using other senses, listening, looking, feeling, sensing the air. the scent. At those times, you're not thinking about your life situation, or your problems, or your resentments, or your anxieties about tomorrow. So nature can bring you into the present moment if you allow it to do so. Not everybody who goes into nature does that, because many people go into nature still almost completely absorbed in their thinking mind while they go through nature, and they perceive nature. I often observe when I go for a walk, sometimes in the forest at home, I often observe people who are they're going for a walk in the forest, but they're only there, but their attention is only peripherally in the forest. Their main attention is still on thinking about their life, what you have to do. Some people are even on the phone. They have the thing or thing in their ears, and it looks like they're talking to themselves. But nowadays, of course, in the past, people who were talking aloud in the street, he thought, oh, he's crazy, she's crazy. Of course, they're not more crazy than anybody else, because they're doing it in their head. But nowadays, people do it, they're actually having a conversation with somebody, and so they're talking. And some people do it in the forest too. And then peripherally, they glance up at a tree or pond. And if you're not talking, they're still involved in... You can often see somebody whose attention is completely absorbed by the process of continuous, compulsive and incessant thinking. They're not really there. And they're not happy. Most of them are not having happy thoughts. Life is so good, I can't stop thinking about it. The strange thing is, to experience the goodness of life, there has to be a moment of cessation of thinking. You can't get there through thinking. Thinking can comment upon it afterwards, yes. But in the moment of realizing, you feel more alive when you meet an animal. An animal comes towards you, a dog, you pat the dog, or you don't, you just look into the dog's eyes. And that also can be a few seconds of self-transcendence, because the dog, not having a conceptual sense of self, can temporarily, for a few seconds, free you of your conceptual sense of self, because you know that this dog is not judging you, because the dog does not have concepts by which to judge you. So the God is just there looking at you and enjoying the moment, unless the dog doesn't like you. And so the dog looks at you, and you look at the dog, and what you see in the eyes of the dog, and there are people who don't like dogs, perhaps due to childhood experience. That's fine. Then do it with cats, or if you don't like cats, then get a hamster or whatever. But if you look into the eyes of a dog, you can sense the being of the dog, the consciousness of the dog, which it's a different vibration of the human consciousness, but it is the one consciousness. And sometimes the beingness of the dog, you can easier sense that more easily than the being of the human, because the being of the human is so, in many cases, so deeply obscured by the mind, by mental noise and mental. So you can't get to the being, because there's a huge personality in front of it, a heavy, dense personality. So you can't sense the humanness or the beingness of the human, but much easier with the dog. And so you look into the eyes of a dog and you feel good for a moment. People love dogs, but they fulfill a wonderful function. Millions of people would probably be more insane than they are normally without their dogs. So they at least they give them a little bit of access, temporary access into being. That's why I produced a little book with a cartoonist, which is called Guardians of Being, because I call the dogs guardians of being. For many humans, they are guardians of being. And so there are many moments, a temporary self-transcendence. How do you know? In that moment, you might notice, there's again this gap I mentioned earlier. There's this gap when for a few seconds you're not thinking because you're relating to the dog. Then the mind comes in, and then the wonderful thing that you will observe or are already observing happening to you is that the gap between the perception of something and the interpretation gets longer. So it's not that you immediately say something or think something when you see something. There's a moment where you just take it in, and there's a gap. And then perhaps the mind comes in, and you might, if it's somebody else's dog, you say, whatever you say when you talk to the owner of the dog, what's his name, or is it a boy or girl, or what breed is it, or how old is he, or whatever you say. Oh, wow, how lovely. So the mind comes in then. If you can, you're a deeper human being. A deep human being means a human being who has the gaps of awareness before the mind comes in, and has longer gaps than a normal human. A gap of so you look at a dog, and at that moment, it feels good to commune with the dog for those few seconds. And so the mind may interpret it as, I love dogs. Okay, yes, that's true, but why? So what you love in the dog, I'm just taking dog as an example, could be a cat or some other animal. What you love in the dog, yes, it's lovely to touch the dog, it's a lovely feeling, and to hold, yes, that's true. But you could still, if the dog dies, you could still for a while the body is still intact, you could still touch, but you know the dog isn't really there anymore. So what you really loved, the dog, is the consciousness of the dog that shines through the dog's eyes. This also applies to humans. It's just more difficult to detect in humans, as I just said, in most humans, unless they have that already, the density of the personality of their person has lessened, and there is something shining through the personality. And then it's easy with humans too. So you meet many humans here who already has reached that stage. They no longer have this density of personality that millions are still burdened with. And you can relate more easily to humans here. There may be exceptions, but that's fine, you'll get there too. There may be exceptions, but on the whole, there is something shining through the personality. And this is why when you meet people here, I don't know I haven't inquired yet at this particular retreat how many countries participants are from, but on many retreats it's like 30 or 40. And the strange thing is, when you meet people, often you find you have more in common with somebody from a totally different country that you meet here. You feel a connectedness that you may not feel with most of the people of your own country. And so there is something that transcends the different cultures that otherwise would become barriers to communication. So there's something in you that arises that transcends cultural barriers, because all the cultural barriers are part of part of the makeup of the personality, the person, the conditioning of the person, which is partly personal and partly cultural, the culture that you grow up in. And if there's no transcendence in you, then your entire personality has been, who you are, has been shaped by the surrounding culture. And then you might find it very difficult to communicate and to really interact with somebody from a very different culture. You might, well, have nothing in common, they have totally different beliefs, they believe in totally different things, or whatever it is. Can't really. But here, when transcendence has happened, yes, you don't need to abandon the cultural, which is part of the culture, which is part of one's, what I call, form identity. The form identity, the form does not just refer to the physical form, it refers also to the psychological form of who you are. And part of it is obviously the culture that you grow up in. You can't escape that. And if you're not conditioned by the values of the culture that you grow up in, you might be conditioned by a reaction against the values of the culture that you grow up in, but you're still conditioned because the reaction is still an involuntary, is a form of conditioning. So transcendence then is to still have a form identity, yes you do, but not to be confined, trapped in your form identity. The form identity has become somewhat transparent almost. Something else, something deeper shines through it. So it's no longer a prison for you. And it's ultimately, although you may honor your form identity, you can honor things that you have done, things that make up your person. You can love your culture. That's nothing wrong. But if that's all you have, then it becomes part of ego. And then you could love your country. But if that's all you have as a collective, then your love of country becomes part of your ego, and then it becomes nationalism. But if you have something else that is deeper, then you can still love your country. It doesn't turn into a collective ego, in which case you have to feel you're totally superior to every other culture, or the others are the enemies, or whatever the ego does. So form identity and essence identity. These are the two. And I see them reflected in the English language, which of course lacks a word for a human being. There isn't one word that describes man and woman together. Traditionally, in English, you use the word man and when you see it often in literature and philosophy or whatever you read texts, when it says all men, it included women, but they just didn't have a word for women. And many older texts, they always say he. When on the writer says, well, of course I include women, I'm just using the masculine pronoun. So there's many languages do not have. The German language has, of course, a word that means human being. It includes men and women, and the word is Mensch. The German word Mensch means it could be a man or a woman. It's a human being. So there's a word for it. Now, English language has human being, but now I'm very happy that the English language has that term, because that points to something fundamental as I interpret it and as I use the term. The human is the conditioned part, is your person, is your personality, your historical person, including the physical body, that is the human you. The being is the transcendent, that which transcends the self, the human level. So therefore you are a human being that points to the two dimensions in you, the human dimension and the being dimension, the transcendent dimension. You could also use the word doing and being. The human dimension is always connected with events and doing and happening. In the human, the doing dimension is what this world is interested in. And then there is the being dimension, doing and being. So we must come to a place of bringing to a balance between the human and the being. But that means here we emphasize the being, because you've got more than enough of the human already. As a human, you're already fully formed, and of course not complete. The human always feels incomplete, and human always remains incomplete, because as a human, you're very limited. No matter what you have achieved as a human, you're not complete, and there's always more to be done, and you feel there's always an underlying sense of lack, an underlying sense of not enough, having missed out on. Many people have the syndrome of, there's even a word for it, it's an abbreviation, the fear of missing out on things. There's always, am I missing out on this? What are they doing? And this, I talked about it briefly yesterday, the sense of unfulfillment on the human level alone. So then you try all kinds of things and it's fine, but nothing leads to real sense of fulfillment unless the transcendent dimension begins to shine through. And there you find, then the human is still important, but no longer absolutely important. The human, and you have to honor the human dimension. You have to deal with it and honor it, and give your attention to it also, but not be completely absorbed by it and in it. And so there's a part of you that remains as the awareness behind all the things that happen. And then that is of absolute importance, to find that and to be rooted in that. Then you can deal more easily with the things of relative importance, and you recognize that everything on the human level is of relative importance, not absolute. Jesus used the term, the famous story of Martha and Mary, which I don't know, some you may remember. The story goes, Jesus was visiting the house of two sisters. They lived, and he was there for lunch. They had invited him for lunch. There were some other people present. And Mary was sitting, and Jesus was talking. He probably, whenever he opened his mouth, he would give out spiritual teachings, I suppose. He can't help it. So, so Mary was sitting at his feet and going, and Martha was busy in the kitchen preparing the meal. Oh, there's still so much to do. Come on, it's just we're late with the time. Come, this where's this thing and that? Where are the plates? And then finally she got annoyed with her sister and said, Jesus, look, can't you tell her to help me? She's just sitting there. I'm doing all the work. And Jesus said, Martha, you are concerned, you're anxious about many things, but only one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that one thing. Only one thing is needed. That means only one thing is of absolute importance, is absolute, and she has chosen that. So this is a parable about being and doing. It is not to be taken literally, which means never do any work again. So Mary represents the being dimension, and Martha represents the doing dimension. And of course, Mary and Martha have to come together to become one, so that Martha can be active without losing connectedness with being. And Mary can start doing things and help her sister without losing the sense of being. Mary has to realize she doesn't have to sit there all the time in order to be present. I can be present when I don't move, or I can be present when I listen to the spiritual teacher, or when I can only be present when I'm not being disturbed. That can happen to some people. And then you have to learn to incorporate so-called disturbances into your presence by accepting them as part of the isness of the present moment. When you accept the isness of the present moment, nothing is an obstacle anymore to presence. If you cannot accept the isness of the present moment, many, many things happen that are obstacles to being present to you. So whether or not something is an obstacle depends on how you relate to it, how you react to it or respond to it. So that's, if people learn to meditate, they are often get very upset when things interrupt or disturb their meditation. There's suddenly somebody's I'm doing my meditation and then the neighbor's using a lawnmower. Oh my God. I can't do my meditation. I need silence. I need to move. I need to go somewhere else. The mind is talking. Good, I have a reason for not meditating now. And then there was a man doing the loving kindness Buddhist meditation, metta meditation, where you go, I love, something like I send love to everybody. So I don't know if it starts with the world or whether it starts with you. I think it starts with you. You love yourself, you love the people in this house, you love the people in the city, you send out loving vibrations into further spaces, and you love, so good. And then the man's 4-year-old daughter comes into the room. Daddy, can you? And the dad says, oh, for God's sake, can't you see I'm doing my loving meditation? Can't I have a moment's peace? I've told you so many times. Okay, let's get on with it now. That's the separation of your spiritual practice and the rest of your life, which is the case with quite a few spiritual seekers. So you incorporate the main place of practice for your spiritual practice is your daily life. And if the mind tells you the conditions are not right for me, because too many things that disturb me, then it's not the case. The conditions are right for you. Whatever life has given you is the material for you to work with. And that's, you come to that place of acceptance of whatever this moment gives you. That's your practice. What's your relationship to the present moment? Is the present moment your enemy? Leave me alone, I don't want this. Or is the present moment your friend? Can you stop arguing with the isness of the present moment? That the ego can't survive for very long. If you stop arguing with the isness of the present moment, the ego cannot survive for very long because its very existence depends on having an antagonistic relationship with the present moment. It needs the enemy, and often it makes the present moment into an enemy. Many people go through life almost continuously not liking what they are dealing with, what they have to do right now, who they are with, what they are waiting for, where they are now because they want to be somewhere else. It's called stress. Mentally you want to be there, but you're here. You want to be finished yet with something, but it's not finished yet, you're doing it. All kinds of things are making a present moment into an enemy almost. And many people live like that virtually continuously. A slightly lesser form of this dysfunction is reducing the present moment to a means to an end only. So the present moment is always a stepping stone to an imagined future moment that you imagine is going to be better than this moment. A very deep-seated pattern in the human mind is that it's never voiced, because when you voice it, like I'm doing now, you can see how dysfunctional it is. But for most people, it's at the back of their minds. There is a pattern in their mind which continuously devalues the present moment and reduces it to a means to an end. So there's always where you want to get to is always considered more important than the step you're taking at this moment as you're wanting to get to, as a means of getting to it. And this is such a deep-seated pattern that humans don't even know that this is how they live. They live always for the next moment. And whether the next moment is a minute from now, or whether it's tomorrow or tonight, or the next vacation, or when I find my ideal partner, or when I get the better job, or move to a better place, or when I retire, whatever. It could be very short or very long the next moment. Never acknowledging the fullness of this moment. That means you miss the being dimension, because the being dimension can only be encountered in this moment. It's the present moment is the doorway into the being, the transcendent dimension. So be very careful that you observe this pattern could still occasionally operate in you, where you habitually devalue the present moment because something else seems to be more important. Now, this does not mean that you cannot have goals in your life. Goals are very helpful to set yourself goals, to work towards something. You need some kind of direction in life. Well, most people do. You need some kind of direction in life. It's good to know where you're going or what you want to achieve. It's good to set yourself challenges, because if you don't set yourself challenges, life will choose a challenge for you. So people who want to avoid all challenges, I'm not going to try anything, as somebody once told me. He said, I've never failed at anything. Really? Wow. Yes, because I've never tried anything. And then this person I had to encounter, life gave him huge challenges. Oh, well, you didn't have a choice. If you don't choose your challenge, life will choose it for you. Okay, so you have to be careful. So it's good to have goals, so that you grow through attempting or endeavoring to attain the goal. That is a good thing. But how do you go about? How do you reconcile having a goal, which seems to imply future, and living in the present moment? So you need to find this balance again. It comes back to the balance between doing. Doing is being active, working towards whatever it is, towards your goal. Now, the doing dimension is, despite the fact that you have a goal, you give your fullest attention to the step you're taking at this moment. That step needs to be empowered. Instead of giving your fullest attention to where you want to get to, and using this moment only as a means towards getting. In other words, you don't enjoy the doing because you want to have arrived already. Your need to arrive is so great that you cannot enjoy the journey. And everything is the journey, your entire life, because when you arrive at your goal, then what then? Then you need another, or you die. So, and also the art of manifesting, as it's called in New Age terminology, manifesting something, bringing something about that you want to achieve. If there's an excessive focus on future, you're much less likely to achieve it, and if you do, it's not going to make you happy. And in the meantime, while you're working towards it, you are unhappy. You're full of stress. You need to arrive. Am I going to make it? I don't know. And while you are engaged in this endeavor where every moment, the present moment is always reduced to a means to an end, let's get on with that. It's the next thing to do. And that's next. Everybody who's helping you, who's around you, you're making them unhappy too. So you're not only making yourself unhappy, you're making everybody around you unhappy. Everybody gets stressed. And so there are entire companies that operate like that. Everybody who goes there every morning is in a state of stress. They're all unhappy. Miraculously, it still functions. But what's the point? What's the point in having a company that works, even if it generates money, if it makes everybody unhappy, and it's probably even making the environment unhappy. So the power is in the present moment, and in the famous, wonderful book, if you haven't read it, the Bhagavad Gita, one of the great spiritual books of the world, one of the most important teachings in the Bhagavad Gita is not to be attached to the fruit of the action. The fruit of the action means the desired outcome. The fruit of the action will look after itself if you give your fullest attention to this moment. And in the Bhagavad Gita, the term used, giving your fullest attention to this moment, is considered as a spiritual practice. It's called karma yoga. It's the practice of action, spiritual action, karma yoga. So that is how to go about finding a synthesis or balance between being and doing. And then you can enjoy the process of creating something or achieving something. Let's say you want to learn that's a simple example. I want to learn to play an instrument. Okay. Now, at first, for the first few months or maybe even years, depending what it is, you're not going to be very good at it. But if you have in your mind the idea that you already want to be a master, or you have the idea that I'm going to be on stage in wherever the concert hall, and everybody's going to applaud me, that's okay. But how are you going about your daily practice? Do you enjoy it, or are you just trying to get somewhere with it? Do you enjoy every moment of it? Then it's a beautiful journey. And whether or not you become a famous, let's say it's a pianist, whether or not you become a famous pianist, you might or you might not, becomes secondary, because you enjoy the journey so much, you enjoy the music so much. And so that's how there's no stress anymore. There's an expression which is, I don't remember exactly what it is, defer satisfaction or something, deferred satisfaction, postponed. They say what you need to learn is to defer satisfaction in order to achieve something. I don't totally agree with that. I can see what they mean. But if you defer continuously satisfaction, you never arrive. The satisfaction needs to be in the doing, not in the arriving or the achieving. And so then you make your entire life into a spiritual practice. If you cannot enjoy the doing, there is something not right. You need to look at either what you are doing, or you need to look at the inner state, the state of consciousness that you bring to the doing. Look how you observe. Observe your state of consciousness while you are engaged in any kind of activity. What is your state of consciousness? Are you fully giving your fullest attention to the activity, and you still know where you want it to take you, but you give your fullest attention to it. And by giving your fullest attention to it, that's almost inseparable from enjoyment. Because the attention itself is the power of life, the power of consciousness. So when you give your fullest attention, you actually become empowered. And that is, whatever it is, make sure that you take responsibility for your state of consciousness at any given time, especially in any activity, so that all these elements of dysfunction are no longer occurring in your life. That if you cannot be, if you are not enjoying what you're doing, and in some cases I must say there may be instances where it's hard to enjoy. Things may happen that are not easy to enjoy. Let's say you're stranded in the night, the car breaks down, you have a flat tire, it's raining and it's cold and there's nobody around and you don't know how to change, or you don't have a spare tire, and there you are feeling miserable. Now you can't say, I need to enjoy this moment. Or something may go wrong with your body, and say, I need to enjoy the toothache. Eckhart said, enjoy the present moment. But that's very difficult. If you can't enjoy it, I wrote about it briefly, I think, in the New Earth, then what you can do is accept it. So there'll be instances when things, so to speak, go wrong in your life, which happens quite a bit. Things go wrong in your life, not according to expectations, so they're against your expectations. You miss the plane, you miss the bus, whatever. Something goes wrong, you break a leg, whatever. Something goes wrong in your life. No, I'm not saying you can enjoy that, but you can accept it, because it's the isness of this moment. You can, by arguing with the isness of this moment, brings an added level of what we can call suffering to that moment. With acceptance of the isness of this moment, there's no longer suffering. It may be unpleasant. Suffering is a psychological thing. It's an unhappy self. An unhappy self suffers. Then there is something else. There can be physical pain. There can be extreme discomfort and other things that would not be described as pleasant. But without the resistance, with acceptance, it does not become suffering. As the term the Buddha used is dukkha, suffering, misery, unhappiness, it's translated. So when something seemingly bad happens, this is what is, you accept. Only ever this moment. You don't accept, let's say, you have an accident, you break your leg, or arm, or whatever it may be, just an example. You don't say, okay, I need to accept now that I'll be stuck at home, that I can't work and earn money for the next 6 weeks, and I can't go out, I'll be stuck at home, and I'm going to run out of money, and I can't pay my rent, but I have to accept it. That's not right acceptance. Acceptance is not some kind of story that you spin around what has happened to you, or the doctor says, you are suffering from such and such a condition. And this is when I say acceptance, it's not to say I must accept that I'm suffering from such and such a condition. No, acceptance is only applied to the present moment. So in the present moment, whatever the condition is that the doctor, the physician has diagnosed, whatever it is, may manifest in this moment in some way, or it may not. It may manifest in this moment as a disability, a physical dysfunction, or something painful. That's what you accept. The acceptance is only focused on the present moment, not on an entire story around it. I might as well accept, but my life has come to an end and I'll probably be dead in a few months. That's again, it's a story that includes future and so on. No, you have to be so present. You accept this moment. This moment is as it is. And if there's physical disability, you accept this moment. And some people some are born with a physical disability, or later in life something happens to them that immobilizes them perhaps. You're confined perhaps to a wheelchair, or you can't move anymore. Things that would normally be described as really bad, a dreadful affliction. Some people, by this, are driven to a point of acceptance of whatever their condition is now, and there's no unhappiness. I wrote about that I believe, in A New Earth, when I was at university. I would always go and have lunch with some friends in the graduate center, and the table next to us, usually there would be this man who wasn't famous at the time, in a wheelchair, and he couldn't talk very well anymore, and he couldn't feed himself, and he was being fed by people who came with him. And some people at that time could interpret what he was saying, or it was almost unintelligible. His head was already hanging down, and then some said he wants apple pie. So somebody brought him apple pie. He could interpret what he was saying. So when I first saw him, I said, "Who is this?" He said, "Oh, he's a professor of mathematics." At that time, he wasn't world famous. He was only known at the university in the academic circles, Stephen Hawkins. And then I observed him more often. And one day he was coming, we were both coming into the building at the same time. I opened the door for he was in his electric chair, and he looked at me with his clear eyes, and I could see he was not unhappy. And that was an amazing realization, because if anybody has justification for being unhappy, it would be him. Because totally disabled. The only thing that still functions is his mind. And then I was told the prognosis that doctor has given, he had another maximum 3 years to live. And that was a long time ago, and he died only recently. He lived for many decades after that, and he did very, very fruitful thinking. That's all he could do. But many people would be very, very justifiably unhappy, because that would normally be considered as something completely unacceptable for a human to suffer from. It's just dreadful. But he was able to come to this point of acceptance, so became free of suffering, of unhappiness. Discomfort, yes, but not the suffering, the level, the psychological level on top of the disability. So that was amazing to see. And since after that, I've seen it quite a few times, and I've met people with serious disabilities, and many of them have, not all, some become very bitter. Their ego becomes very rigid and very strong, and they resent everything and everybody. So it does not. Is not necessarily what happens. It's an opportunity for total surrender, but it is no guarantee that it will happen. So if he can be free of suffering, you can do it too. And the secret is simply accept this moment and just stay with this moment. So if the doctor says you're suffering from such a condition, you don't accept that. You accept just whatever you experience at this moment. And then your attention moves more and more into this moment, because in certain cases, for example, when the doctor says this is serious, you don't know how much future you have. Nobody knows how much future they have, so-called future. It could end at any moment. But for most people think, okay, I've still got time, and that's fine, but you may not. So you live as if you didn't have time. Now, if you didn't have time, you would just be present moment centered. If you go into the past, you suffer. If you go into the future, you suffer. And so some people are forced into presence by circumstances. Circumstances can force you into presence, and if you don't go there, you become very, very unhappy. So that in that case, you don't even need any spiritual teaching. The suffering does it for you. You're being forced into the transcendent state. Maybe not completely, but at least there is a huge opening into the transcendent dimension. But the difference here is we voluntarily invite the transcendent dimension into our lives. We're not dependent on extreme conditions happening to us, because that it may happen too, but if anything extreme happens to you, some great disaster, it's possible that some great disaster may be waiting for you. It could be death. Some of you might even die in the next 50 or 60 years. We could all die. Oh my God. Of course, yes, mortality, and this comes to the awareness of mortality, is, from the point of view of the conceptual self, a very negative thought. Mustn't think about death. Come on, don't think about it. But awareness of mortality can also be an opening into the transcendent dimension. When you see how short-lived the form identities are, the physical form and the psychological form, when you contemplate death by going to a cemetery, or by sitting next to a dead body, or by watching photographs of street scenes or little clips from early camera clips from street scenes in London, Paris, New York, hundreds of people running around the streets doing this or that. And this is a contemplation of impermanence and mortality also, because all these people that you see in the photograph or in these old clips, they are all dead. And not only are they dead, nobody remembers who they are. Nobody. So you can see there's a man, there's a child, there's a woman, and they're engaged, whatever they are doing. Who are they? Nobody, not only nobody remembers their names, their problems have also completely disappeared with them. Their entire problematic existence has dissolved into nothingness. But it was so important at the time, seemingly. My life is just so full of problems, and then the soap bubble bursts, and you are gone, and your problems are gone. As you know, I've mentioned it in a book, in some Buddhist traditions, the monks go to a morgue where the dead bodies are kept in order to meditate there. From time to time, they do that as a spiritual practice. And the Western mind would say, this is a morbid, awful thing. How can they do that? And of course, there's a deep reason for that. It's the contemplation of impermanence of all forms. Now, what happens when you don't shrink away from the impermanence, when you really face it, when you really face the impermanence of all forms, which is hard to do in the West. They like to hide certainly they hide dead bodies in the West, unless it's a close relative. You cannot even see a dead body. You cannot even get permission to see a dead body. It's not done. In many parts of India, dead bodies are still more visible. You burn them out in the open. That can be a huge meditation. Wow, that's where I'm going too. Only a few years separate me, this form, from that, being consumed by fire. In the meantime, my body is slowly being consumed by this strange thing that we call time. The rate it gradually consumes your body. You might have noticed by looking in the mirror and comparing it to a photo taken 30, 40 years ago. Who did this to me? It's some demon called time. Got in there, got infected by time, so we all carry this virus of time, and it's slowly killing us. And there's no vaccine, there's nothing you can do about it. They haven't found a cure against time. And so what is being consumed is your form identity. So when you face it, you don't shrink away, you face it completely. That can be an opening into the transcendent dimension when you realize how fleeting your form identity actually is, which is not only the physical body, but the entire makeup of the personality with its problems and its need to be right and whatever the ego does. You see how fleeting that is. Then something opens up that is deeper than the form identity which you recognize as so incredibly fleeting and impermanent. And that which opens up is the essence dimension, the transcendent dimension. And you notice it by noticing a great sense of peace arising within you, but an alive peace. And you can't interpret it really. I'm interpreting it, well, perhaps you can, I'm doing it. So there's this peace arising in you, and where does it come from? Why can peace arise when you contemplate a dead body, for example? Or you look at a photograph and see how short-lived every human life is. Because you completely accept it, you're becoming aware of that, and that which is not subject to time in you, the transcendent, it suddenly comes to the forefront, emerges. And it's a peaceful realization. And this is the peace that passes all understanding. It's called somewhere in the New Testament, the peace that you can understand. Why do you feel so peaceful in the face of death? And death could be great loss too in your life. Suddenly you lose everything. It's a form of death. Even the breakup of a long-term relationship, a marriage after 20 years, it happens after 30 years, suddenly, or after 10 years or one, but a breakup of a relationship is a form of death too. It's also a way of experiencing impermanence of all forms in this life. So any kind of form of death that you face it completely, can be an opening into something deeper within you, and that's a beautiful thing. This is why I used to love going to cemeteries when I lived in England, especially in the villages. There's the old church, and then there's a little graveyard next to the church, and the gravestones are there, but some of these gravestones have been there for 200 or 300 years, so you can't even decipher the names anymore. There was a name there once, but you can't decipher it anymore. And then you just sit there and that's beautiful too. In medieval times, many people on their desk, they had a skull. In order to be reminded, you see it in some old paintings. You can see that on people's. Often there's a skull. It's to remind you of death, which is impermanence, because when you are aware of impermanence, many things in this life, you recognize the relativity, the relative importance of everything that happens on the form level. Because death is the opening into the transcendent. So you just facing, for some people, even when they have a serious accident or serious illness, they suddenly begin to realize how unimportant most things that they were deeply concerned with before actually are. So it gives you a very different perspective on life to be faced with the fragility of the form, whether it's an accident and then people suddenly, sometimes it's transformative, and people after a serious accident or serious illness, they're no longer the same because they realized they were concerned about many things, as Jesus said to Martha, but only one thing is absolutely needed. So you have to choose this. That's the very foundation for your life, is the realization of your essence identity. And then your form identity is fine, and you can accept even looking in the mirror in the morning and seeing, oh, time has been added again. Or as my dad said, mirrors are no longer the same quality they used to be. Even autumn, which is approaching, is not quite here yet. In a few weeks, all these trees will turn into beautiful colors, reds and browns and yellows, and it'll be amazing. Of course, what's happening to them? All the leaves, they are dying, but it's beautiful. So every fall, death happens around you everywhere, and even when you walk in a forest, you see half the forest is death, because life comes out of decaying matter. Decaying matter is everywhere. It's only the human mind and the egoic mind that says, this is bad, don't look at it, and this is good. No, they form a unity. And then death is no longer a frightening thing. We need to learn how to die, but you have to start dying already. Die to a conceptual self. That's a good death. The disciple asked the Zen master, "Master, how do I learn?" What did he ask? I can't remember exactly what he asked. He asked something like, "Master, how do I learn to how do I learn to die?" And the master says, "Learn to live." "How do I learn to live?" And he says, "Learn to die." Something like that. So learning to live is learning to die at the same time. So die before, there's a beautiful saying, find death before death finds you. And this is what we're doing here. So because we are dying here to our conceptual self, and it's actually quite beautiful. Another way to invite the transcendent dimension into your life, apart from contemplating death and many other things, is to, you can highly recommend it, give more attention to the little things in your life. Give attention to the little things, including objects that you handle, things that surround you, little seemingly insignificant things that are actually part of the aliveness of this world that you would normally not give attention to. A simple flower, even a blade of grass, there's a breeze and some blades of grass are moving. It's nothing spectacular. You wouldn't say, "Oh wow, I need to take a photo of these blades of grass, they're moving in the wind." It's not as spectacular that you would get your phone out and take a photo, although you could. And, there's not a bad idea, but don't take a photo, just look. Look at the little things. A window, look wherever you are, there's a window. And then sometimes just give attention to what is beyond the window. Give it 20 or 30 seconds and look at the window as a painting. So what is the window showing? There's a frame around the painting, and you look. I started doing that a while ago, and I sometimes take pictures of windows with a frame, and you see, because it becomes a painting. Now, why is that helpful? It centers your attention in the present moment, and you're able to focus your attention on something that otherwise you would overlook, and you see the beauty and goodness in what's there, in the manifold manifestations of life everywhere around you. There's the life manifesting through countless billions of forms, life and so beautiful. Of course, it's not just what you see with your senses, it's what you sense at a deeper level, which is that which lies behind sensory perception, that the life that lies behind the life that's in the trees, the life that's in the leaves of the trees, that there is something unseen there that shines through the form, and that is one with that which shines through the form of you, your form. There's a sentence in the famous, the little book, I don't know if it's a children's book, adults read it, Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry, if my French pronunciation is correct. And he says, what is essential is invisible to the eye. The eye. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Now, eye does not only refer to visual, it refers to all sense perceptions, all organs, all sensory organs. What is essential you cannot see. It's invisible, and you cannot perceive it with your senses, but it can shine through that which you perceive. What is essential about you, and what is essential about me, is invisible. All you see is the physical form, and a little bit of the personality that you can see through facial expressions and how people speak, and so on. But the life that you are, nobody could find you by examining with their senses, with gigantic electron microscopes. They cut open your head and examine your brain. They cannot find you by examining, no matter how deep they go into the matter of the physicality of you, you are not there because you are not material. There's a relationship between the physicality and that the unseen, yes, but you are essentially an invisible being. What is visible about you is only a surface phenomenon. So what is essential is invisible to the eye. No scientist could find even your memories, which are relatively little thing, but you've got millions of memories somewhere, but nobody could find them with the greatest microscope in your brain cells. Where is the memory? I remember the teacher I had when I was 6 years old, my first teacher. I remember her name. I even remember how she behaved. I remember how my father, who flirted with all women, flirted with her. So he did that so that she would treat me better, and it worked. But where does that memory survive in? Would anybody ever be able to find it if they examined my brain? No, it's not. How do you remember the room you were in when you were 8 years old? You can immediately go back here. You can even remember how the door handle felt, how the door opened. Incredible things, but it's all invisible. And that's only the memories. And there are much deeper levels of invisibility. So who you are is you are invisible. What is visible is very, very little. So what is essential is invisible to the eye. Same applies to the tree. So you look at the window. So I take photos sometimes, just as a little, and sometimes I show it to people. Look, here's a painting. Because it's not a painting, it's just a window frame with something beyond it. And then you look. And the ability to look at the seemingly insignificant thing is not just looking, It's appreciating the aliveness of things. Everything is alive. Appreciating little objects. I sometimes handle objects when I just, normally when you live always for the future, everything is a means to an end. Every object is a means to an end. You never honor the things that surround you. The chair you sit on, the table that you've been using for years, the pen, the toothpaste. There's always these little things, they're all alive, so sometimes you can handle things a bit more consciously and appreciate them. You appreciate, this is a simple curtain. It's there and there. There are some artists have done that. First art was painting spectacular sceneries or great historical events or great saints. They paint of these extraordinary things. Paintings, we used to depict extraordinary things. And then at some point, artists came in, perhaps starting with the Dutch, perhaps, who knows, who painted very simple scenes of a kitchen maid in the kitchen preparing a meal. And nobody in the past before would have painted that because it's not a significant person and it's not a significant moment, seemingly. And yet, when the artist painted it, you see this scene of a woman having a jug of water, and there's a loaf of bread, and he's about to cut the bread. And there's the room, the kitchen, and there's a little window. It's an amazing, that space has a sacredness about it. But nobody had seen it before. The artists were the first to see it. That nothing is insignificant. And so you don't have to go to art gallery to appreciate the seemingly insignificant. Is something telling me that I should stop speaking? Now, this is linked with what is called, I'm sure you've become familiar with gratitude. Gratitude is an important thing to practice, but what is that actually? Often gratitude is associated with certain thoughts in your head. Say, some people say, I need to be grateful for my life because look at all these other people have much worse lives than me, so I need to be grateful for my life. So in order to be grateful, you need to contemplate others whose life are not as good as yours. That doesn't seem quite right. It's always, the real gratitude is the gratitude for the present moment. But what does that mean? Can you have gratitude for a glass of water? Well, you can say, okay, I'm trying now very hard to be grateful for this glass of water. And you're still moving in the realm of thought. I'm grateful for this water. It's no better than nothing. That's good. I'm grateful for this glass of water. It's lovely, and I'm drinking it now. Oh, thank you. It's good. But you can go deeper than that, and what gratitude really is appreciation. Appreciation means to see the intrinsic value of it. And in order to see the intrinsic value of it, you cannot have that through thought. You have to give your attention, your fullest attention to it. And then, by giving your fullest attention, you no longer need any words in your head that are telling you that you're feeling grateful. You appreciate it beyond words. You appreciate because you can sense the miraculous thing that this is, that we call water. And even the aliveness of it, you can sense it, and you don't need words. And this deep appreciation happens beyond discursive thinking. It happens beyond labels. And so it just means you're giving full attention to something. And so that is very important, because all these little insignificant things every moment, even the action of walking, sometimes to become conscious of just the steps you're taking. It's beautiful. You're walking. Perhaps you can hear crunch, crunch, crunch. And certain noises produced by nature. At nighttime, especially here, you can hear all kinds of, like, I don't know what they are. There are frogs and there are crickets, and they're beautiful. So you give attention. It's not just a peripheral phenomenon. It says, listen, look, smell the air, feel the air on your skin. You're appreciating, wow, this is a transcendent moment. In that moment, you're transcending who you are as a person. You're not thinking about your problems. Because most of your life consists of seemingly insignificant moments. Even if you're a VIP, whatever that is, if you're a VIP, your life is full of insignificant. You're always surrounded by little things, and you can only ever, either you're sitting somewhere or you're walking somewhere. It doesn't matter whether you sit. Even if you sit, you can sit on a bus and appreciate that. For the first time, I experienced it after I had a certain shift in consciousness. And the next day I was on a bus again in London, and I contemplated the streets and the crowds of people walking about, and it was all so lovely. I was just contemplating. I hadn't realized that I had stopped thinking a lot, so I just thought, oh, it's so peaceful. It took me 3 or 4 years to understand why it was peaceful. And that was because I wasn't thinking that much anymore. And with that, the amount of thinking reduced by whatever, 75-80%, life became very peaceful. It was the transcendent dimension appearing. But I was sitting on a bus, appreciating that moment. And from then on, it would no longer make a difference whether I was sitting on this bus or in a private jet. I don't have a private jet, nor do I aspire to having a private jet. But I got a couple of times got invited on a private jet, and yes, I must admit, you don't have to go through security and all that. The car takes you to the foot of the plane, but in the end, you sit in another seat and you look out of the window. And you drink a glass of juice or water, whatever it is, and there's the scenery goes past you. Not that much different from sitting on a bus, really. Not unless you have a mental, you live through a mental construct of yourself, which then the conceptual self then tells you, here is me sitting in a private jet. Or you could have a mental construct that tells you, here's me at my age and I'm still sitting on a bus. For many years, my mode of transportation in England was a bicycle, even into my 30s. And I was happy on the bicycle. That was after the shift, just in 29. I was happy on a bicycle, and but I could have thought, here I am struggling on a bicycle in the middle of London, could be killed at any moment, and there are these people. They're probably corrupt in their BMWs and totally unspiritual, disgusting. I could have had those thoughts, but I didn't. So the bicycle, and then I graduated. Somebody gave me a car. It was an old car. I loved it. It was a Beetle, the old one, the old BMW Beetle, and then learned to drive it. Then I was sitting in a Beetle, bicycle, Beetle. And finally I was able to buy a car. I chose the cheapest I could find, which I loved also. People made fun of it because they knew it was cheap and it was regarded as not reliable. It was Russian made in Soviet Russia, called Lada. And I loved my Lada, was happy in it. I didn't have a concept. Anybody who buy that, they still exist, but they probably look different now. Anybody who buys a Lada is either very poor or has no ego. Or both, which was the because there were people in the street that would point and say, ha ha ha, a Lada. The only somewhat embarrassing moments were when the car was going uphill. It was very slow. And then the books came out. And then 13 years ago I bought a luxury car. And I loved it. I still have it. And just as happy as I was in the Lada, and just as happy as I was in the VW Beetle, and just as happy as I was on the bicycle. Not that much different. You just appreciate what's the isness of the moment. When I had the bicycle, I would leave it. I couldn't take it in. Wasn't allowed to take it into where I lived. I had to leave it outside, chained to a railing. And I would often look out of my window and I'd see my bicycle there chained to the railing and say, oh, it's still there. It's just loving. I loved it, just looking at it. So the little things that make up most of your life, to appreciate them rather than always waiting for some big thing. Appreciate all the little things because your life consists of 99% little things. Now, occasionally a big thing happens. It might be called a wedding. My wedding, and that doesn't last one day. And or another big thing is whatever promotion or winning the lottery or getting the first prize or whatever the big thing. But they're very short-lived. And even not to expect spiritually to have some kind of huge experience, because it comes and goes, but rather something emerges in you that remains the background to all experiences, and that's permanent. So you don't look for an experience. This is why I think it was Jack Cornfield who wrote a book with a wonderful title, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. So you have a spiritual wow, and then you get home. Oh, I haven't done my laundry. And of course, the laundry needs to be part of your spiritual experience. Everything becomes incorporated. I do my own laundry. I don't give it. Nobody does it for me. I don't give it away. I put things in the washing machine, and I enjoy the moment. I wouldn't even want anybody else to do it, because I enjoy doing it. You can enjoy getting dressed in the morning, looking at and undressing at nighttime. Many things you get an opportunity for enjoyment, appreciation. Otherwise, life passes you by, and you say, I haven't lived. Why haven't you lived? Because you haven't given attention to life. You have ignored it all. Life continuously was around you, the aliveness of things. You were surrounded by it all your life, and you ignored it almost completely. Why did you ignore it? Because you were so absorbed in this problematic self, this me in your head. You couldn't give much attention to anything else. And then you reach the age of 80 and 85, and say, okay, was that it? You missed the whole thing. A moment of stillness.